Ayca, Aydogdu, and welcome to Tell Me. We live in a time of Islamophobia, and what does that mean exactly? An exaggerated fear, hatred and hostility towards Islam and Muslims. Now, Islamophobia existed before the 9/11 attacks, but increased in frequency in the past 20 years and became a global crisis. Last year, the tragic attack like the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, where a white supremacist stormed into two mosques and killed 51 worshippers, shows this is the reality and real action is needed to confront the growing tide of Islamophobia around the world. So in this edition of Tell Me, we'll talk and share our stories to find ways to get past Islamophobia and how do we overcome Islamophobia. And joining me on the programme today, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism expert Dr. Maryyum Mehmood and Huffington Post journalist Rowaida Abdelaziz. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us on the programme today. Now, also thanks to everyone who have shared their views and stories with us on Tell Me today. Let's watch Latifa from Istanbul first.
My name is Latifa Özdemir and I'm currently studying law in Istanbul, but I was born and raised in The Hague in the Netherlands. I can say that after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, also in the Netherlands, the public opinion towards Muslims changed. And since then, Islamophobia in Europe manifests itself through individual attitudes and behaviors, but also in policies and practices of institutions. As Muslims in Europe, we face, for example, with physical or verbal threats or attacks, and especially towards women like me wearing the headscarf, but also legislation that indirectly targets Muslims. But what touches me the most is the public pronouncements made by some journalists and politicians that stigmatize us as Muslims as a group and disregard our positive contributions to the community and the countries in which we live.
And Maryyum, let's start with you. So can you tell us more in detail, in the past 20 years, how has Islamophobia risen and where are we today?
Well, an awful lot has happened in the last 20 years, as Latifa has mentioned. For one, we live in the aftermath of 9/11, the war on terror, coupled with state-level securitization policies against Muslims. And that, alongside portrayals of Muslims in the media, scapegoating of Muslims as the problem. And, the stigma is very real. It's documented as evidence that Muslim women, especially those who wear the headscarf, are at the receiving end of the most vile forms of Islamophobia. And I'll give you an example. So we've got a monitoring agency in the UK that has found that 5% of the population of Britain, just under 5%, is Muslim. However, they make up, roughly just under 50% of religiously aggravated hate crimes. That is just enormous to think about. Now, as an academic who has looked at, 100 years before, in the past, what was happening in Europe, the rise of fascism, the rise of populism, it's almost as if things haven't gone away. They were just lying latent. So the same way in which Jewish people in Germany were vilified, were scapegoated, were seen as the bogeyman of Europe, that's what we're seeing today, replicated, but, the same problem, except the people in question, the victims, those who are being targeted, happen to be Muslims. So things are worsening.
Let's bring in Rowaida Abdelaziz here, but first watch the video by Asma, who sent us from New York and her experience, her story.
Hi, I'm Asma. A time I experienced Islamophobia was at a hospital in the New York City area. We thought my brother had appendicitis, so we took him straight to the emergency room. And after we checked in, there were 3 nurses who were just standing around laughing, joking, and just pretending like they couldn't see my brother and I. And after like 20 minutes of them just fooling around, they came, took my brother's vitals, put him in a room, just like threw us in there and were like, someone will come. And they were just being very rude, very brisk. They didn't care that my brother was in pain. They were just trying to waste our time. The hospital was not busy at all, so it was very clear that they were ignoring us. Because my brother was a minor, they were like, we can't do anything. Like, we need to talk to your parents, which was fine. I complied with it. I was like, okay, I'll call my mom. And they were like, does your mom even speak English? And that was when I realized that they just think that I'm a Muslim who doesn't know anything, and they just didn't care about our pain. And it was just a very traumatizing experience.
So, Rowaida, from your own experience in extensive journalism, Islamophobia in the US, is this very common, and what kind of attacks are we seeing against Muslims?
Unfortunately, Asma's experience is quite common. I think when we are talking about Islamophobia, it's extremely important for us to understand the layers and the complexities. On the one hand, kind of like Maryyum was saying, we have the institutionalized Islamophobia that comes from the top down. We see this in legislations and policies, and we've seen an increase of that, yes, post 9/11, but it's also existed pre 9/11. And then the more common types of Islamophobia that we hear more often from friends and family is the situations that happen on the ground. Now, this can be threats of intimidation, physical violence, assaults, discrimination in the workplace, at school. And this is the daily experiences that Muslims and Muslim Americans in particular continue to face. Now, in Asma's case, as we can see, she wears the hijab. And so Muslim women tend to be on the forefront of Islamophobia, particularly Islamophobia that is happening on the ground. The stereotypes are made that they don't speak English, that they're uneducated, that they're not independent, that they're not capable of holding conversation or being successful. And this is what had happened to her. There was an assumption that she didn't know how to take care of her brother, that her mother, probably who looked like her, didn't know how to speak English, that Muslim Americans were new Americans, right, who are not well integrated into U.S. and American society. And we continue to see these types of microaggressions happen on a daily basis to Muslim women and men. And this is truly symbolic of a lot of the Muslim American experience.
And how much do you think US President Donald Trump's rhetoric against Muslims contributed to the spread of anti-Muslim sentiment in the US?
Studies and reports have shown and confirmed time and time again that President Trump has only emboldened Islamophobia in the country. Look, we knew that anti-Muslim rhetoric existed before Trump. It existed with the foundings of this country, right? Muslims did not immigrate on September 10th in 2001. Muslims were among the slaves that came here in this country. Black Muslims are among the oldest Muslims groups here in the U.S. and has continued to develop and grow. I mean, Muslim Americans don't have a majority race, and so we are extremely diverse, and yet the types of hatred and xenophobia and attacks that we face tend to be the same. And so we've seen people, white nationalists, have been emboldened by President Trump's rhetoric. We saw it from day one in his candidacy when he promised to, quote, a complete shutdown of Muslims. And it was one of his first executive orders, the Muslim travel ban in 2017. And so this has emboldened not just people on the ground who continue to repeat some of the president's language when he told one of the Muslim representatives, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, to go back, right, to where she come from and go back to Somalia. We see this language go back, be used an incredible amount of time. And so the correlation continues to be fascinating when we see something the president says, whether it's because he heard it from the media or he comes with it on his own, and almost directly the same types of languages and attacks happening on the ground. So without a doubt, it has only emboldened and increased and have given these type of people an unprecedented amount of confidence to not only just flaunt their hatred, but justify it. I mean, we see it on the campaign trail. People who are now running for office say, well, if President Trump was able to win and use this type of hateful language, then we can win in our own local offices. We can make it to Congress. And so it has normalized a different type of terrifying rhetoric that is almost justified for these people.
Now, apart from political discourse, we should be also looking at media, and we have a good video by the Director of Centre of Media Monitoring, Rizwana. Let's watch that and continue from there.
My name is Rizwana Hamid, and I'm the director of the Centre for Media Monitoring, which was set up by the Muslim Council of Britain to monitor how the British media reports on Muslims and Islam. We analysed thousands and thousands and thousands of online articles from print and broadcast media, and we've found in one study that over a third of the articles analysed misrepresented and generalised about Muslims and Islam. Over 50% reported on Muslims in negative ways. And the most reoccurring theme that they reported on Muslims about was terrorism. And they report inconsistently when it comes to terrorism, so that the words terror, terrorism, or terrorist appear 9 times more frequently alongside the words Muslim and Islam than they do alongside terrorist attacks committed by the far-right neo-Nazis or white supremacists. Even in the coverage of COVID, we've found that the media has tried to scapegoat and blame Muslims for the rise in the infection rate. We've had images that show women in hijabs and mosques alongside articles which have nothing to do with Muslims or Islam. We've had reports that tried to sensationalize a spike in COVID-related infections during Ramadan and Eid, all of which was unfounded. We even had false reports claiming that over half of the infections came from Pakistan, when in fact the majority came from Europe. So this is very dangerous because Cambridge University did a study and it found that the media's reporting of Muslims and Islam was contributing to growing hostility towards the British Muslim community. So we at the Centre for Media Monitoring are committed to holding the media to account and ensuring that they report accurately, fairly and responsibly.
Now, Maryyum, this insight shows that by only looking at Britain, actually, media also has responsibility in the rise of Islamophobia. And I researched the numbers and found out that only 0.5% of journalists in the UK are Muslims. So is it a lack of diversity in the workforce that's one of the reasons causing this, maybe, looking beyond Britain, of course?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, the figure that you quoted is apt. And just looking, more broadly, not just in the media, but for instance, the background that I come from, academia. I'll tell you that, there was a survey conducted by Dr. Nicola Pollock, an entire research project, not just a survey, which found that in the UK today, there are only 25 Black British professors who are women. Now, that is just startling. And amongst them, check out the intersectionality of all of this. So, as Rowaida was saying earlier, that there is much more to unpack here. But, how many of these women would be Muslim, do you think? So even in this field of work, in power, in positions of academic knowledge exchange, which has a lot of social impact, you see that Muslim women especially are really underrepresented. And, that's why a lot of us are, coming together of late. So I am fortunate enough to be a co-convener of a network of Muslim women in academia. And I can tell you that there are so many women who are of Muslim heritage, who are thriving, who are experts. And we have an entire database of them, and it's just growing, And it's just wonderful to see this.
Now let's talk also what measures can be taken, but let's first watch the video by Iman, who is a filmmaker and teacher from the US.
Hi Ayca, this is Iman Zawari coming to you from Florida in the United States. So the topic of Islamophobia is something that affects many of us in the entire world, and research shows that Islamophobia gets on its highest during election season, which is right now for us in the United States. So I think about what are the best ways to combat Islamophobia. Some of those are actively learning about Islam. So encouraging people to read books by Muslims, join interfaith clubs, attend intercultural events, visit a mosque, and basically become a lifelong learner. Talk openly about Islam and the religion. Just as we must speak about race to better understand it, we must speak about religion to better understand Islamophobia and the prejudice against people because of their religion. As silly as it might sound, befriend a Muslim. Think about what Michelle Obama said. It's harder to hate up close. And lastly, something I like to do is encourage schools to celebrate Muslim holidays. I do this every year with my children, where I go in and I speak about Ramadan and Eid. We make lanterns, we eat Eid cookies, and we celebrate a holiday so that the students know about Eid and Ramadan. And these are just a few ways that I combat Islamophobia. Thank you, Ayca.
Now, Rowaida, continuing with you, I really liked what she pointed out there. It's harder to hate up close, and also she reminded me of a recent study in Australia, a project which was funded by the government, actually called Islamophobia Neighbourhood Experience. Exactly pointed out what Iman has just mentioned: befriend a Muslim. So people who lived in closely with Muslims show that and are less likely to express Islamophobic views. That's what the project shows. So So looking in the US though, do you see that possible? What do you think needs to be done to tackle Islamophobia, to overcome it?
It is absolutely possible. I think the point of Islamophobia is for people to recognize that the goal of it is to dehumanize Muslims. It's to take away the emotions and the experiences and the feelings that everyday Muslims feel. It is to paint them all as this scary group who all have evil intentions, malicious intentions, and are just violent. And that within its essence goes away with the day-to-day human interactions. Now, offering someone a cup of chai or a cup of coffee is not going to solve all of the world's structural racism. Again, we were talking about the institutional aspect of it, but when we're talking about at least the daily experiences, there are groups of people, or especially when we're talking about young children, who are inheriting their views from at home, from at school. And so when the community is involved and we're interacting with those people, it absolutely does make a difference. Like I said earlier, Muslim Americans who tend to know a Muslim have favorable views of Muslims in Islam. And so I think what Iman was saying really just hits her point super well. It's going to take a lot more. I mean, we're seeing this every day. We've mentioned COVID earlier. Muslims are a part of the essential workers. There are frontline workers, there are doctors, there are medical practitioners. There are people that are treating folks. We see them, the human rights lawyers, our educators. Muslims are a part of everyday life. And I think this is still a conclusion that many people are coming to. We have to recognize it's not a good Muslim versus a bad Muslim. It's not the faith is violent, but there are good few apples. We need to be talking about the diversity of the group and that it is respected as a faith group. Again, people say, well, the term Islamophobia shuts down a criticism of Islam. Criticize Islam all you want. No Muslim is telling you you're not allowed to have a debate or a critique of the faith. We are asking for the basic humanity and the decency. And I think even that has not been granted to many Muslims across the world. And that is what's really amplifying the hatred that's on the ground. So there are absolutely ways and solutions. I echo everything that she had said on the call. I also echo, for non-Muslims to kind of have that courage and to go visit a mosque and to go ask people questions, because it can get exhausting. For Muslim Americans who feel like they need to be perfect human beings all the time. They need to be educators all the time. I think it's time we held these places accountable, whether it's our schools, our workplaces, our government, because at the end of the day, if it's just a one-way conversation, we're not going to get quite far. It does take two to tango. And I think tackling anti-Muslim hatred is absolutely one of those ways and one of those rules that is applicable here in this situation.
Okay, let's now watch a video by Wasim from North India, who's a filmmaker from there, making short films actually about Islamophobia itself.
Hi, I'm Waris Ibn Farooq from India. So what is Islamophobia? It's a global phenomenon, an exaggerated fear, hatred and hostility toward Islam and Muslims. In the current political environment, anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia has become very common to Indian people, whether in politics, national media or Indian cinema. It is common to see and hear negative stereotypes, fear-mongering messages and mob lynchings of Muslims every day and their place in society. Mostly in Indian cinema, Muslims always portrayed as terrorists, villains, corrupt people or trash of the society. And it affected the mind of people from other Indian religion and created a bad images of Muslims in their mind. I also experienced it. Whenever I go to non-Muslim areas of India wearing skull cap or Muslim traditional dress, people stare me as I'm a terrorist. So we should make a good cinema on the cultures of Muslims and their history instead of portraying stereotypes, images of Muslims, so that people's negative interpretations about Islam can turn into positiveness. The world really needs those films, those cinema, where Muslims are hero, good people, where we can see true images of Muslims like in the Turkish drama Drillis Ertugrul. This will also help us fighting Islamophobia.
Now, Maryyum, unfortunately, Islamophobia has become a theme in the Bollywood cinema, and when you're selling something to the masses, it is a responsibility upon you, and it has its consequences. So, especially in cinema and TV drama, how much does it affect Islamophobia there, and what should change?
I want to just echo everything that Boris has just said. I really empathize with his position as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. And, just thinking about the personal experience that he mentioned and it being so common, the fact that, some people think and say, oh, well, Muslims aren't a race. That's true, we aren't a race. But what has happened is certain markers of our identity or expressions of how who we are. So whether it's the skull cap, as Boris mentioned, or the hijab, or our names, Muslim sounding names, they've all been racialized or put into categories which have been attached to them, have had negative stereotypes. So when we look at, rightly said, the Bollywood narrative or depiction, it's startling because Muslim men, unfortunately, are seen as and portrayed as terrorists or traitors. Any mainstream Bollywood movie, it will be guaranteed that that is the case. And whereas Muslim women are exoticized, fetishized as, this, subdued and submissive petal sort of, as a rose, often equated to such in the Hindi language. And it's awful, it just perpetuates these themes and these narratives that are very negative. They hold these really potently negative connotations. Now, when there are humanized sort of portrayals of Muslims, whether it's, I'll give you an example of Shah Rukh Khan, SRK, who is the king of Bollywood, renowned around the world. He made a movie a couple of years ago titled My Name is Khan, which, portrayed himself as a American Muslim. And the tagline was, my name is Khan, and I am not a terrorist. So even that, it's really revealing that when Muslims are trying to normalize themselves, they're still trying to break away from this negative stereotype. And unfortunately, it just perpetuates this, this narrative, that this attachment rather of terrorism with Islam, with Muslims. And what we need to see ideally is, we are Muslims, showing characters, protagonists, as Boris had said, who are role models, citizens, or just ordinary people who are normalized as such, without having to do away or downplay the Muslim element of their identity. It's hugely important that we have these portrayals in front of us in mainstream media, whether it's Bollywood, Hollywood, or global cinema. I think, as Boris just said, just to touch on, Turkish dramas have done an immense positive work in the Indian subcontinent at large, whether it's India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh. The reason for the success, and even within the diaspora of Muslims beyond, the reason behind the success is there is this wonderful storyline, and it doesn't stigmatize Muslims. It just sounds so simple that there shouldn't be any stigma, but unfortunately, it just seems to be a common recurring theme that we need to end. And empowering filmmakers like Boris and other storytellers is key. Platforming them, having their voices heard and their stories shared, that is essentially what should be happening.
Now, we don't have much time left, actually, and there are many aspects to talk about, but we can't go into all of them. But we have a message from Imam Ali Toz from Cambridge Central Mosque, and it's important to understand religion, so I do want to give voice to him. So let's watch that video and then end the program.
Birbirimizi anlayacağımız, birbirimizin duygularını hissedeceğimiz ortak değerlerimiz var. Annelik gibi, babalık gibi, kardeşlik gibi değerlerimiz var. Bu ortak değerlerle birlikte farklılıklarımız da var. Farklı dilleri konuşuyoruz. Farklı ülkelerde yaşıyoruz. Kimimizin de renkleri farklı, inançları farklı. Bu kadar iletişim imkanlarının geliştiği, görsel, yazılı medyanın çok daha ileri seviyelere geldiği dünyada biz sadece kulağımıza fısıldanan, bizlere telkin edilen bilgilerle iktifa etmek suretiyle herhangi bir insanla, komşumuzla, herhangi bir ülkeyle, herhangi bir inançla, İslam, Hristiyanlık, Budizm fark etmez, herhangi bir inançla karşı karşıya geldiğimizde kendi öz bilgimizle hareket etmek yerine başkalarının bize telkiniyle hareket ediyoruz ve hata ediyoruz çoğunlukla. Bu şekilde bizler farklılıklarımızı, zenginliklerimizi asla dönüştüremeyiz. O halde araştıracağız, okuyacağız, konuşacağız ve ortak değerlerimize sahip çıktığımız gibi farklılıklarımızı da zenginliklerimiz olarak kabul edip bu dünyayı barışa, esenliğe, güvenliğe hep birlikte çevireceğiz ve yaşanılabilir bir dünya ile hem kendimiz hem de bizden sonraki gelen nesillere güzel bir dünya bırakmış olacağız.
And on that message, I will have to wrap the program. So it was a pleasure talking to you both, Dr. Maryyum Mehmood and Rowaida Abdelaziz. Thank you very much for joining Tell Me this week. And next week on Tell Me, the sudden death of Black Panther star Chadwick Boseman shocked the world, and he died of colon cancer. He was fighting it for the past 4 years, and he was a true fighter. So in the next program, we will be looking at why people are reluctant to get tested and to get checked out, what it means to be fighting cancer. So share your thoughts, your concerns and your stories to us. You can write to my Insta account, Chacha I. Do stay safe and sane until next week.